Jack Harold Paar was born on May 1st, 1918 in Canton, Ohio, the son of Lillian M. Hayne and Howard Paar. He moved with his family to Jackson, Michigan, about 40 miles south of Lansing. As a child, he developed a stutter which he learned to manage. He contracted tuberculosis when he was 14 and left school at 16. After dropping out of Jackson High School, Paar worked as a broadcaster for WIBM, a local radio station. He went on to work as a humorous disc jockey at other Midwest stations, including WJR in Detroit, WIRE in Indianapolis, WGAR in Cleveland, and WBEN in Buffalo. In his book, P.S. Jack Paar, he recalled doing utility duty at WGAR in 1938 when Orson Welles broadcasted his famous simulated alien invasion, The War of the Worlds, over the CBS network and its WGAR affiliate. Attempting to calm possibly panicked listeners, Paar announced, "The world is not coming to an end. Trust me. When have I ever lied to you?" In 1943, Paar was drafted into the U.S. Army during World War II, which interrupted his tenure as the host of WBEN's morning show, The Sun Greeters Club. He was assigned to the USO in the South Pacific to entertain the troops. Paar was a clever, wisecracking master of ceremonies, and he narrowly escaped being disciplined when he impersonated senior officers, especially Colonel Ralph Paar. After World War II, Paar opted not to return to WBEN, instead seeking opportunities in network radio and film. He worked in radio as a fill-in on The Breakfast Club, and appeared as a host on Take It or Leave It, a show with a top prize of $64. In 1947, Jack Benny, who was impressed by Parr's USO performances, suggested that Paar serve as his 1947 summer replacement. Paar was enough of a hit on Benny's show that Benny's sponsor, the American Tobacco Company, decided to keep him on the air, moving him to ABC for the fall season. Paar later refused American Tobacco's suggestion that he could come up with a weekly running gag or gimmick, saying he wanted to get away from that kind of old hat comedy, the kind that being practiced by Jack Benny and Fred Allen. The show was then terminated, as earning Paar the enduring image of a spoiled kid. A profile of Paar by the Museum of Broadcast Communications suggested that Par's later emulated Benny's mannerisms. Paar signed as a contract player for Howard Hughes' RKO studio in the immediate post-war period, appearing as the MC in Variety Time, a 1948 low-budget compilation of vaudeville sketches. He later recalled that RKO producers had trouble figuring out what kind of screen characters he could play until one of the executives dubbed him Kay Kaiser, band leader who had made films for RKO, with Warren. Another compared his leading man appearance with Alan Ladd. Paar projected a pleasant personality on film, and RKO called him back to MC another film vaudeville show, Footlight Varieties, in 1951. He also appeared in the 1950 film Walk Softly Stranger, starring Joseph Cotten. In 1951, he played Marilyn Monroe's boyfriend in the 20th Century Fox film Love Nest. Paar returned to radio in 1950, hosting the $64 question for one season, then quitting in a wage dispute after the show's sponsor pulled out and NBC insisted everyone involved take a pay cut. In 1956, he gave radio one more try, hosting a disc jockey effort on ABC called The Jack Paar Show. Paar once described that show as so modest we did it from the basement rumpus room of our Bronxville house. Paar got his first taste of television in the 1950s, appearing as a comic on The Ed Sullivan Show and hosting two game shows, Up to Par in 1952 and Bank of the Stars in 1953, before hosting the morning show on CBS in 1954. He had the Jack Paar Show on CBS, a Monday through Friday 1 to 1:30 show that ended in May of 1956. Paar guest starred twice in 1958 on Polly Bergen's short-lived NBC comedy variety show, The Polly Bergen Show. In July of 1957, after the failure of Tonight America After Dark, NBC reverted its late-night show Tonight to a talk variety show format, as it had been during Steve Allen's tenure as host. Jack Paar was brought in to host a reformatted Tonight. He was at the time working for CBS and hosted the network's The Morning Show, which was similar to NBC's Today Show, before he agreed to jump networks and take over Tonight. Under Paar, most of the NBC affiliates that had dropped the show during the ill-fated run of America After Dark, or had never even picked it up, began airing the show once again.
I walk out in New York, and if there's applause, I'm surprised, and I say... and the audience sits there saying...
Parr's era began the practice of branding the series after the host, and as such, the program, that was still called Tonight, was marketed as The Jack Paar Show. A combo band conducted by Parr's Army buddy pianist, Jose Milas, filled commercial breaks and backed music entertainers. When Paar was on vacation, guest hosts presided over the show. One of them was somebody that will become very familiar with The Tonight Show in the future. Other guest hosts included Jonathan Winters, Orson Bean, as well as the show's announcer, Hugh Downs.
What do you do on TV?
I'm a personality type show.
Oh, really? I never watched.
I'll tell you if you don't... I'll tell you if you don't tell anybody. Because this may come as quite a surprise
Yes.
to you. Because I'm informal and
I was told when I
when
made reservations.
when I'm speaking, you always wait. Because you don't know who I am yet.
I'm beginning to find out.
Starting on September 19th, 1960, it was one of the first regularly scheduled shows to be videotaped in color, with the show recorded very early in the evening and broadcasted from 11:15 p.m. to 1 a.m. Eastern Time that night. Only a handful of complete Jack Paar Tonight Show episodes exist. All of them are black and white kinescope recordings. No color videotapes of any complete Paar Tonight shows are known to exist. Paar hosted the program from 1957 to 1962.
I'm gonna get banned. You want to do commercials with me?
Are you Luke? Are you little Luke?
I don't drink. Everybody thinks I drink.
What are you on? You've been there and back.
Isn't that silly? You better sell it before we get in a lot of trouble.
Don't open your purse. I'm afraid what's in there.
Parr's original announcer was actor Franklin Pangborn, but he was fired after only a few weeks for not showing enough, quote, spontaneous enthusiasm, unquote. His replacement was Hugh Downs, who stayed with Paar till the very end. At first, the show was called Tonight Starring Jack Paar. After 1959, it was officially known as The Jack Paar Show, or The Jack Paar Tonight Show, a phrasing which led to the name The Tonight Show as opposed to simply Tonight, being adopted permanently after Parr's departure. Only a few minutes of video of Parr's talk host career in color are known to exist today. NBC's policy at the time was to preserve programming on black and white kinescopes, but this policy only applied to live or videotaped primetime programming, and as such, the videotapes of most of Parr's Tonight Show appearances were taped over and no longer exist. A policy that continued through the first 10 years of Johnny Carson's hosting of the same series. During Parr's stint as host, The Tonight Show became an entertainment juggernaut. Paar generated the most obsessive fascination and curiosity from press and public of anyone who had ever hosted the show. He strove for compelling conversation as well as humor. His guests tended to be literate racketeurs such as Peter Ustinov or intellects such as William F. Buckley Jr., as opposed to just actors and other performers selling their current work, while Paar earned a reputation as a superb storyteller. He surrounded himself with a memorable group of regulars and semi-regulars, including Cliff Arquette as the homespun Charlie Weaver,
Leonard Box. You remember Leonard Box?
I heard you speak of it.
Yeah. Leonard, he's a small man.
I understand.
Leonard Box bought an automatic milking machine to milk his cows because he felt he was losing his grip.
That's good.
The other night, he forgot to turn it off. And this morning, all his cows were turned wrong side out.
author-illustrator Alexander King, Teddy Thurman, NBC's sultry Miss Monitor, and comedy actresses Peggy Cass and Dodie Goodman. Goodman was a regular from shortly after the show's debut until Paar fired her in 1958. Goodman frequently stepped on Parr's lies and was seen as an uncontrollable upstager. Parr's oft-repeated expression, "I kid you not," sometimes Humphrey Bogart as Captain Philip Keogh, uttered often in the K-Mutiny, became a national catchphrase. In 1959, Parr's gag writer, Jack Douglas, became a best-selling author with My Brother Was an Only Child, The Funny Thing Happened to Me on the Way to the Grave, and autobiography, after his regular appearances with Paar. Douglas's Japanese wife, Riko, often appeared, as did Hungarian beauty queen Zsa Zsa Gabor. French comedian Genevieve and several British performers appeared as well. Paar enjoyed conversing with foreigners as he knew that their accents would spice up the proceedings. Hal Gurney directed Tonight for much of Parr's tenure, as well as the period between Parr's departure and Carson's arrival, when the show was presented with a series of guest hosts. Gurney went on to direct Parr's primetime program, the Jack Paar Program, and later directed a lot of stuff from David Letterman. In 1959, Paar was criticized for his interview with Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Parr's on-location interview was the last time any American late-night show filmed in Cuba until Conan O'Brien visited the country in 2015 for an episode of his show Conan. On December 1st, 1959, Paar again made news by asking an apparently inebriated Mickey Rooney to leave the program, remarking, "It's a shame he was such a great talent." Rooney and Paar quickly reconciled. In 1961, Paar broadcasted the show from Berlin just as the Berlin Wall was going up. He attacked members of the United States Senate and the U.S. press who criticized him, including syndicated columnist Dorothy Kilgallen of the New York Journal American, Earl Wilson of the New York Post, Jack Gould of the New York Times, Irv Kupsnit of the Chicago Sun-Times, and Senator Mike Mansfield. Paar also engaged in a number of public feuds. One of them was with CBS luminary Ed Sullivan, and another with Walter Winchell. The latter feud effectively ended Winchell's career, beginning a shift in power for him from print to television. Paar famously introduced actress Jane Mansfield with the line, "Here they are, Jane Mansfield," a reference to Mansfield's breast. The writer of that joke was Dick Cavett, who would later go on to host his own show on ABC. Paar was often unpredictable and emotional. The most notorious example of this kind of an on-screen behavior was demonstrated on the February 10, 1960 show, where one of his jokes was cut from a broadcast by studio censors. The joke in question involved a woman writing to a vacation resort and inquiring about the availability of a WC. The woman used that term to mean water closet, aka a bathroom, but the gentleman who received the letter misunderstood WC to mean Wayside Chapel, aka a church. The full text of the joke is this. An English lady is visiting Switzerland. She asks about the location of the WC. The Swiss, thinking she is referring to the Wayside Chapel, leaves her a note that says, in part, the WC is situated 9 miles from the room that you will occupy. It is capable of holding about 229 people, and it is only open on Sunday and Thursday. It may interest you to note that my daughter was married in the WC, and it was there that she met her husband. I shall be delighted to reserve the best seat for you, if you wish, where you will be seen by everyone. NBC censors replaced that section of the show with the news coverage and failed to inform Paar of that decision, which led to, on February 11, 1960, Jack Paar doing something completely unthinkable and quitting his show on the air.
During the taping of the Jack Paar program earlier this evening, Jack Paar walked off the show in protest against the deletion of one of his stories from last night's show. In the exercise of its proper responsibility to the public, NBC deleted this material last night because it considered it to be in bad taste. It is NBC's hope that Jack Paar will reconsider his action and return to the program.
I've made a decision about what I'm going to do. And only one person knows about this. It's Hugh Downs. My wife doesn't know it, but I'll be home in time and I'll tell her. I'm leaving the Tonight Show. There must be a better way of making a living than this. There's a way of entertaining people without being constantly involved in some form of controversy, which is on me all the time. It's rough on my wife and child, and I don't need it. I like the National Broadcasting Company. They've been swell to me, and I've been pretty wonderful to them. I took over a show with 60 stations. There's now 158. The show is sold out. It's the highest, I think, money producer for this network. And I believe I was let down by this network at a time when I could have used their help. You have been peachy to me always. Jack, you know what I said to you.
Although Paar had earlier told his announcer Hugh Downs of his intentions to quit the show, Dow at first thought that he was joking. He expected the host to return to the stage, but the abrupt departure left Downs to finish the broadcast himself. While Paar traveled outside the country, his disappearance became a national news event. The entire broadcast of this episode exists on an audio tape from WMCT in Memphis. Urged to return to the show by his friend Jonathan Winters, Paar returned on March 7, 1960, strolled on stage, struck a pose, and said this.
I believe my last words were that there must be a better way of making a living than this. Well, I have looked. And there isn't.
That line produced a burst of laughter from the audience. He then went on to explain his departure with typical frankness. Leaving the show was a childish and perhaps emotional thing. I have been guilty of such action in the past and will perhaps be again. I'm totally unable to hide what I feel. It is not an asset in show business, but I shall do the best I can to amuse and entertain you and let other people speak freely as I have in the past. Jack Paar left the show on March 30th, 1962, citing the fact that he could no longer handle the load of putting on an hour and 45-minute show a night, 5 nights a week. Over the course of its run, Paar was given more time off so that most Mondays featured a guest host, and all Friday shows were Best of Paar repeats, giving Paar only 3 nights of material to fill. To fulfill the rest of his NBC contract after leaving Tonight, Paar hosted a primetime weekly series, the Jack Paar program, and aired weekly on Friday nights through 1965. Jack Paar, however, left The Tonight Show more popular than it ever was, and more popular than what Steve Allen did beforehand, which left a ton of pressure on the person that was going to eventually take over the role, and even bigger shoes for the next man to take his place, who was kind of in the middle of a career question mark, if you will, because he did have success in Hollywood and actually had several shows over at CBS in the 1950s, but his career kind of took down a little bit, getting a game show called Who Do You Trust, and a couple years later, after very much convincing, he decided to take that next step. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's Johnny.
From New York, The Tonight Show, starring Johnny Carson. Johnny's guests tonight are Joan Crawford, Rudy Valley, Tony Bennett, Mel Brooks, the Phoenix Singers, Skitch Henderson with the NBC Orchestra, and me. I'm Ed McMahon. Right now, let's welcome the fellow you waited 6 months to see.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. This is kind of an emotional thing for me because I've known about this show for a long time. And the newspapers and the magazines, and I've probably been interviewed 150 times in the last 9 months since I've known about this. As I say, you work up to it. We come over here this afternoon. We meet the guests that are on the show. And you get kind of charged up. I don't mean to be maudlin about it. But I know that tonight a lot of my friends are watching all over the country. And I only have one feeling as I stand here knowing that so many people are watching. I want my nana.